Hello, you're watching Sighline, an interview program on MNB World. Today we have invited to our studio Mr. Jeff South, Associate Professor Emeritus of Robertson School of Media and Culture at the Virginia Commonwealth University. Thank you for accepting our invitation.
Well, I'm honored, so thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. I would like to start our interview with the purpose of your visit to Mongolia. I know that you have been here for last couple of months and you have been very busy. What was all your visit about? Yeah.
Well, I'm here as a Fulbright specialist helping the Nest Center for Journalism Innovation and Development. And I'm working with them on various projects, including doing data journalism workshops and also assisting at a project of the Nest Center, which is the Mongolian Fact-Checking Center.
That's really interesting. And how long have you been working in the media and journalism sector?
Wow. So I started after I graduated from the university. My university was the University of Texas, and that was 1974. And I spent about 23 years as a journalist working on newspapers primarily in Dallas, Texas, Phoenix, Arizona, Norfolk, Virginia, and some other places. And then I switched over to teaching journalism, and I spent another 23 years or more doing that.
Very interesting. We talked about the data journalism workshop organized by the Nest Journalism Center. And I would like to ask, of course, there are a lot of viewers who are not familiar with the concept of data journalism. What is your definition of the data journalism? What is it about?
Okay, that's a great question. So data journalism means news stories that are based, at least in part, on a journalist's independent analysis of authoritative, credible data. Usually data that comes from government, but not necessarily. And data journalism stories blend that data analysis with the human subject, the human face. So a good data journalism story is about people, of course, because journalism is about people, but then it uses data to show that that person that we're talking to is representative of a bigger group. So that to me would be my definition of data journalism.
Right. Maybe there are like goals of using, what is the main advantage of using data for the journalists, for the beginners, for the professionals?
Right.
What is the main goal of the data journalism?
Well, the main goal is to make our stories more accurate and more comprehensive. When I was a reporter back in the 1970s and early 80s, before computers were common, I would do stories, and frankly, I would print what people told me. And sometimes what they told me was true, or they would think it was true, but a lot of times it really wasn't. My editor would come in the morning and say, oh, another bagel shop has opened up in Dallas. That's 3 that I think I've seen. Jeff, do a story about a boom in bagel shops. And I would do the story, but I would never really know whether what I'm writing was perfectly true. But now with data, we can really measure. Have there been more stores opening in the downtown area? Has crime been going up or down? And so we can use data to test what people tell us and see whether it's true or not. In the United States, we've got lots of politicians who will campaign on the fact that crime is going up, and so we need to crack down on criminals and give more money to police departments. But if you look at the data, you can see that's not necessarily true, that crime in many places has been going down. And so I believe that the main advantage of data journalism is to get closer to the truth and to make our stories more accurate and more comprehensive.
Right. But I think you have heard maybe during the workshop organized for Mongolian journalists, sometimes when there's journalists and reporters write some stories about maybe the government or maybe some big business organizations, they face some backlashes. And what would be your advice to starting journalists? How to protect themselves with their data?
Right. Well, of course, you want to make sure that your analysis is correct. So when you analyze data, I always bring in another reporter and maybe an outside expert to look at the data that I've analyzed and see if I'm on the right track. I think that's important. Another thing is to make sure that your data is solid, that you have good data integrity, meaning that I might get data from multiple sources about the same subject to see if it all lines up. And I might get not just the national numbers, but I'll get the numbers, say, for each state and each county in the United States to make sure that those smaller geographic areas add up to the national total. So I know that the people who gave me those national numbers are not simply plucking them out of the air. So those are some ways where we can really emphasize the accuracy of our data analysis, because it can be a dangerous form of journalism. When I'm simply typing a name, if I make a mistake, I make one mistake on a name. If I'm analyzing a data set and it has 100,000 rows of data and I make a mistake in my formula, I've made 100,000 mistakes. And so it's a powerful tool, but with great power comes great responsibility, as Spider-Man would say.
Okay, that's a really good expression. And you worked like more than 40 years in journalism sector in USA. And to your opinion, what kind of media types, like broadcasting or print media, they use data journalism more?
Well, in the early days of data journalism, it was primarily a newspaper and online tool. But now I've seen broadcasters, even radio reporters, but especially television journalists, effectively use data to shape their stories. Obviously, on television, you don't have the capacity to recite a whole bunch of numbers. So I'm not saying that they're doing that, but a television journalist might distill that data analysis to its essence and give those 2 or 3 numbers that really are powerful, and then perhaps have a really good media or visualization of the data, a chart, a map, and then refer readers to the online version of the story, where readers can look at the entire data set and get the information maybe for their neighborhood or their city, information that, of course, the journalist did not have time to present on the air, but is certainly available online.
That's great. And how do you see the prospects and future of the data journalism itself?
Well, the field is always changing. More and more journalists are using tools like drones, for example, to collect maybe air samples or...
That's interesting.
Exactly, and then weaving that into a data set, or including that into a data set, and then analyzing that. So technology has kind of enabled new forms of data journalism, plus the tools are always changing. And so when I started out analyzing data, I had to write code. There was no point-and-click Excel program or Google Sheets or anything like that. Nowadays, it's so much easier, and my prediction is that in the future, it will be even easier than it is now. And so the tools, I think, are getting easier, but for me, the challenge is not the technology. It's always the culture and the mentality of journalists and their own understanding of numbers and data literacy.
Right. And my next question will be like, sometimes in Mongolia, maybe you heard during the workshop, one reporter, one journalist has to prepare like a daily 4 to 5 news reports. And when it comes to data journalism, it incorporates a lot of data, a lot of numbers. And to your opinion, what the quality report incorporating some data, how much time is needed to write some quality report with data?
Right. That is a good question. And certainly there's a learning curve. So the first couple of data journalism stories that I did took forever.
Okay.
And then you get faster and faster and faster. And now when I weave data into a story, I believe I write the story faster than I did in the old days. First of all, by analyzing data, I can often pick my interviews much better than I could in the past. In the past, I might be calling around friends and contacts, trying to find that perfect person to interview for a story about, let's say, poverty.
Okay.
But now I can analyze the data and I can see, oh, this is the poorest neighborhood in my city. And then I can go there and talk to people, and I'm much more likely to get that compelling interview that will really make that statistic come alive and make our viewers and our readers care about that subject. So the long answer is, initially, data journalism might take longer than doing a regular story, but eventually it will enable you to be an even faster journalist.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And maybe from our interview, maybe there are some people who are interested in data journalism who are watching our interview. Is there any programs that teach regular journalists the data journalism?
There are, and many of them are free. All the materials that we're doing for this workshop that the Nest Center has been organizing, we're putting them online. So we'll have a link to them from the Nest Center's website later on. Plus, if you just Google around data journalism training, you'll find free, there's a free textbook that was published by the European Media Center, and other resources for helping journalists who may not be familiar with this area get up to speed. So there are a lot of free resources, and while journalists by nature are very competitive people, I would never give you a story that I'm working on until I publish that story.
Sure.
But when it comes to data journalism, data journalists tend to be very collaborative. And there are organizations of data journalists. Here in Mongolia there are, and there are internationally, that you can join, and you can ask people questions like, how do I learn this programming language? Or, I have this data set and I'm trying to get Google Sheets to give me a certain percentage or something, and how do I do that? And I think journalists would be astounded to find how helpful their colleagues are when it comes to questions like that.
Right. This is your first time in Mongolia, but I think you have conducted similar trainings, workshops in other countries. For example, in how many countries have you conducted
Gosh, that's a great question. The fact that I don't have an answer means a lot. So I've done data journalism training in Ukraine, in Vietnam, in several countries in South America, in Azerbaijan. I work a lot with a nonprofit called the International Center for Journalists that's based in DC, but really does work around the globe. And so I've often done trainings for the ICFJ, the International Center for Journalists, at their DC headquarters, where they bring in journalists from Russia and China and India and Brazil and other countries. And so I don't have a number on the countries I've visited to do trainings, but there have been a lot. Plus, I've done a lot of training in China in connection with another Fulbright program. And I taught at a university there, Northeast Normal University in Changchun in Jilin province. So I taught a year-long class there. And then I had gone back to China several times after that to teach at Fudan University and Xiamen University, focusing on data journalism. So it is a skill set that is of interest to journalists around the world.
That's great. It means there are a lot of chances for Mongolian journalists to attend the courses Yeah?
There are.
On data journalism.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for staying with us. That was Sightline with Jeff South, Associate Professor of Virginia Commonwealth University. Thank you for staying with us. We'll see you next time with more news and updates.